Hello, I'm Joan. I'm a Canadian family physician who also works as a restorative medical educator, facilitator, and coach. I create spaces that rehumanize the work of healthcare. I'm creating this podcast to remind myself, as well as anyone else working in a helping profession, that when you are working and caring for your human patients, you are the other human in the room. Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for yet another episode of The Other Human in the Room. Okay, so today's podcast is about a topic that I have spoken about on this podcast before, for sure, and have an evolving, healing, and yet still complicated relationship with, which is money. You've heard me talk about money before a few times, and especially the one that I did about like money shame. I think that's still a little bit living in my body, though, way less than it was before. This idea of like, don't talk about money. Money is like, it's like rude to talk about money. If you talk about money, that means that you are like bad in some way or like immoral or in it for the wrong reasons, especially like if you're talking about making money while working in healthcare, as if working in healthcare equals the way you earn income is by delivering healthcare. But there's this sort of really sinister undercurrent of like altruism type thinking that's like, don't talk about the fact that we make money. And that is quite prevalent amongst like a certain population within healthcare. Also, certainly there's sort of the vibes you get from certain patients of like, you guys make too much money, or, oh, you don't have to worry about money. And then that has its own little shame spin to it, right? Etc. So I'm not going to get all into the money shame thoughts. That's what the past podcast was about. This one though, the reason I know that I am still on my journey to fully like unshame my relationship with money and talking about money is that I was noticing a pattern as I was delivering my Creating Space workshop to various audiences. So you've heard me talk about Creating Space quite a bit. You know, I have a whole like coaching program based on it. Also, I really love giving like a 1 to 2 hour version of that workshop to different groups. I've done it to specialists. I've done it to family physicians. I've done it to medical students and residents. And it's like, at this point, my favorite workshop to give. I have a few that I absolutely love, all of them, but this one, I can tell that it feels very exciting for people and very relevant to what they're going through, the whole Creating Space concept. And one of the things I always do, because I love keeping it very workshop style, is like inviting people to offer their objections to me. Like I give my pitch that working under your capacity and creating space for you is beneficial not only to you, but to patients and to healthcare in general. And probably the primary objection that I get, especially one that I honestly, thinking back over the past few times I've done the workshop, I felt a bit wobbly about answering, was when people brought up the need to make more money. They say, okay, that sounds really good, but I have bills to pay. Learners will say, that sounds really great, but I have a giant, amount of debt that I have to start paying down as soon as I graduate. Or even notions of like, I've heard that I need to invest early in order to like maximize my investments for retirement. And so that means I need to make all the money now. And I just think that is a fascinating argument. And honestly, until I like sat down and like wrote out the notes and really thought about it and created the script for this podcast, I still a little bit believe them. I'm like, oh, they're kind of a point, but it's still better to be relaxed, Like I would have some arguments and I would like logically, cognitively know that there's a fault or a flaw in their argument, but I hadn't actually fully thought through what that was. So I wanted to create a podcast in case anyone has heard me talk about creating space and has had that same objection, and also to really like reinforce for myself. So like in the future when I'm doing this workshops, I can at least point them to this podcast and be like, listen, I have a whole podcast about this, and in that podcast I go into great detail about this. So if these few arguments I offer don't seem to land, go listen to that and see what you think. Because the ironic thing is, it's just not factually true necessarily that if you work under your capacity, that you even make less money. That is the thought error that I actually really had to confront, that I still a little bit had in my mind. I am not saying that every person who creates space will automatically and immediately make more money, but I had been under the impression for myself that there had been times over my creating space journey where I made less money. But directly before recording this podcast, I finally looked at my QuickBooks and looked back over the last number of years where, I can feel the progression from like 2020 to 2025, where we are right now, and feel how much more space I've created for myself and for my life, and how much better I feel now that I'm working under my capacity. And I did have an assumption that meant that sometimes in there I was making less money. But actually, each year I have made, at least a little bit more money. And when I say at least a couple thousand to $10,000 more dollars, just to kind of name, I'm not saying I now make millions of dollars, but I just found that interesting that I had, even in my head, I was believing that thought error that yeah, you're right. And there was that year that I made less money. But actually, that has not been true. Even though I work less clinically, I bill less clinically, I overall actually am not making less money. I just thought that was interesting. So there's direct evidence against that thought error that working less equals making less money. We got to pause for a minute and think about where we got that idea from, right? It's a very not even just capitalistic notion per se, that it's not just that, right? There's certain versions of capitalism that are I'm going to work as little as possible and still make a bunch of money, right? I don't know, CEOs and people think that way. But it's the fee for service mindset is what it is. And so when you think about, especially if you work in healthcare in a way where you work fee for service, of course, then you think I have to work more to make more money, because that's the setup for fee for service is I only make money when I am doing a service. And so more services equals more money. There's still flaws in that, actually, in terms of how much time we spend doing certain aspects of our work. And there's ways to still work less overall and still sort of optimize the money you make, I would say. And lots of us don't work in a purely fee-for-service mindset. So it's fascinating that those of us that, for myself, I work in a blended model, a capitation model. So it's not factually true that as soon as I see less patients, less dollars come into my bank account, because there's other ways that money is made, even just clinically, right? So really noticing that that's the origin of it. And beyond that, even if you're yeah, but I've only ever worked salary or whatever, why do I have a fee for service mindset? I think it probably comes from just the you got to work hard for your money, the hustle culture, the notion that if you work hard, you will be rewarded for working hard. And I definitely think if you literally don't work at all, then you likely won't make any income. But the notion that it's a straight linear line, harder work equals more money forever, it's just not factually true. And what I argue is that the inflection point in which it becomes diminishing returns is once you're working beyond your capacity, you are not necessarily going to be making more money. And so I'm going to talk about that in this podcast. And also, even if you are short-term making more money, if you're playing the long game, if you're hoping to have a whole career of earning income through, your adult years, it really would benefit you to consider this under your capacity working model and working strategy. And so I'm just going to talk all about that. Before we jump into that, though, I did want to also acknowledge that money isn't the only currency of value for most people. So definitely that kind of capitalistic thinking of like, yeah, I can't because of money. Money is important. It's a very important resource in the way that our whole society is set up. And before I jump into the money arguments, I also just wanted to name, even if the way it works out for you is you bring in less financial income, if you find your way to balance and create space and work under your capacity, perhaps you will still find your life overall is more satisfying and fulfilling. Because you may have other currencies in your life that you value more, that nourish you as well as and resource you as well as money. For example, like connection, relationships, whether it's like romantic partners, whether it's children, whether it's parents, whether it's family members, whether it's friends, like whatever relationships matter to you, having this space to invest in those and getting sort of the return on investment of those can be really powerful, and certainly is to be balanced out with the pursuit of money on its own, right? Health, certainly, right? So we see many examples of people pursuing the resource of money so singularly that they do not invest time and attention into their health instead. There's sort of like this, it's like a stereotype for a reason, and it's absolutely true. I see it all the time from the perspective of patients who, they just feel like they cannot take time off of work to honor health concerns that their body is giving them, because of money. And there's ways in which just the whole capitalist game has made it so much harder for people to do that. Even taking it away from the individuals of patients, certainly I see tons of employers and just like workplace culture where people are shamed and blamed and bullied into not taking time off of work, because it's like, or not being paid to take time off of work. Like there's all sorts of messiness that way, right? Maybe for you, an important currency is like having a meaningful impact on a particular segment of the world or the world at large. And so sometimes we do that right alongside making money, for sure. And sometimes some of the ways we make meaningful impact, we don't earn income for, right? So the currency of pleasure and joy and delight in your life, right? Sort of the like classic like deathbed question of like, at the end of your life, no one says they wish they worked more. It is very rare that at the end of someone's life, people say, I wish I made more money. And that doesn't mean that money is nothing. That's not to shame if you also desire to earn an income, at least have a stable income as you figure out how to create space, or even earn more money as you create space, right? Like that's not to shame that either. But I just wanted to name, of course, that as you consider how you're going to create space, some of the motivation to do so may not come from the pursuit of money. It could become from the pursuit of other things that are important to you. And the good news is, as you pursue those other things and creating space for those things in your life, you won't necessarily lose income. There are absolutely ways that you could create space and not lose income. Now, depending on your situation, I'm just aware there's like privilege in saying that people will have different access to different things. And I encourage you not to just assume, like I did, that you will have to make less money. I was like, well, I'll make less money, but I'll be happy. And I was like, okay with that. And then I just now realized that it's not even factually true. So consider the possibility that that might not be true for you. Look, what if you problem solved and looked for ways in which to at least maintain similar level of income, and if not even growing your income through the process of creating space, right? So now I want to talk about like what I mean by that and like specific examples of how you absolutely could end up like saving money, making money as you create space. Even as you work less, you could actually end up either earning more or at least saving more, so having more for you, okay? So, when you are working beyond your capacity, you are at risk of losing money and might be losing money now. And everything I'm about to name, if you feel like shame or embarrassment coming up, I'm not offering that to you at all. I'm sort of describing things that I have personally either experienced or seen someone experience, whether it's a client or a student or someone like a colleague, you know. So I'm using real life examples, not in detail where you'd be able to identify them, of course, but like, there is a real financial cost to working beyond your capacity. I think that's so important, especially when people think like I can't make time for me, even though I'm feeling burnt out and I'm hating my life, but I can't work less because of money. Like, what if you, I was going to say should, but I don't want to say should. What if you did work less and that was because of money? Like, what if that helps you earn more money? Possibly. Keep more of your money, have more money to actually spend on what you want to spend it on, right? So, one that maybe seems obvious, but to say it right up front, right? So if someone works beyond their capacity, and again, whenever I say someone works beyond their capacity, I'm always going to name the system that allows a person also to, and encourages and appears to reward, including financially, working beyond a capacity, right? So it's never only a person's individual decision, though it ultimately is your decision, which is so exciting, but also we understand why people end up working beyond their capacity because of all of the messaging we get, how the systems are set up, how the demand for our services is far higher than the amount that we have to give according to our capacity. So I'm really just putting in a little unshaming plug there. Having said that, how many stress leave, burnout leaves are we seeing these days, right? In every industry, certainly myself, seeing my patients in multiple different industries going off of work due to burnout and stress, right? Also, people really like reaching a limit and quitting and leaving their job completely. And so all of those things could result in loss of income, as in making less income than they would have made if they were working at a sustainable pace, especially when you think long term. An example of this that I have seen in quite a number of like coaching clients I've worked with or people that I know are physicians who locum. This one, it feels like the most direct, right? So like some physicians who locum find locuming so stressful and have difficulty sort of holding space for themselves in that setup, because it's like I have to work as hard as I can to please the person that I'm locuming for, or the person I'm looking for actually has like standards and demands of me that are beyond my capacity. So I work so hard, and it burns me out so completely that then I take more time between locums. So like when you look at they might work really hard for that person, not necessarily make more money unless they're really paid per service or per hour completely, which is actually typically not the case, but they make that money and then they take, multiple weeks or months between locums to recover. So this is an example of like, if we can't find our flow that allows us to work in a sustainable way, for example, if you're a locum and you can't find a way to work in a sustainable way, overall you will end up working less. And that's makes so much sense, and no shame here. And it therefore notice what would happen if you found a way, including if you found docs to work for or people to work for and communities and cultures to work in that really honored your capacity. And if it's hard to find those because we are so indoctrinated, what if you for yourself set firm boundaries and said, hey, this is what I can offer you. If I offer beyond that, I burn myself out. So this is what I have to offer. And through that process, you end up actually working more and earning more income. So like that's like a very kind of specific math example, right? There's also like diminishing returns on your hustle, right? So something I've seen a lot of is sometimes people are working so hard and they're doing so much work that not only are they not completing their inboxes, you can never complete an inbox, but not only are they not finding a flow of inboxes with like a turnover rate that feels good for them, not only are they not completing all of their documentation and instead having more open charts than they have time to close, or like to complete their documentation, but a lot of systems actually if you haven't completed the charting, you can't bill. That's my understanding. And so I see examples of folks actually losing money. Like they literally don't get to the billing. They're so busy seeing patient after patient after patient and are really entrenched in this like altruism mindset of seeing patients and like, don't think of yourself, don't think of billing, don't think of finishing your documentation. And so they've fallen so far behind that like now the billing window is passed and they've actually like lost out on income. So that's an example of diminishing returns. Yes, you're working really hard, but like so hard at certain aspects of your work and not prioritizing the kind of work that actually ends up giving you income, like billing for your time. And you can see how the sort of malignant, this sort of hustle and also like altruism service mindset can be to not fulfilling even like your financial needs, your financial goals. Another piece that's like maybe a bit more subtle, but is really, really important is like when you're on that hamster wheel of like hustle, 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 it's hard to like pause and reflect and identify which parts of your work are like high value versus low value, right? So like, again, I'm going to mostly use physician examples because I know how physicians are paid best. I would be curious for those that work in a different model, how this applies to you. And if you have trouble seeing it, send me an email or DM and we can work through it together because there's a way. There is always a way. Actually, I can think of a little bit, but so I'll just start with the fee-for-service thing. So like say someone is purely fee-for-service and they are spending hours on inboxing and charting, like in hyper detail, and have a lot of difficulty being as efficient as they can be, or even delegating off some of the tasks around forms or charts or inboxes, especially charts and inboxes where you don't make any money. You don't get to bill the government, at least where I live, for charting, for inboxing. That's all kind of apparently included in the fee of seeing the person, right? And so the high value work, like say you're purely fee for service and you do want to optimize your income while still honoring your capacity, what would it look like to then really prioritize the things in which you know you earn income for, which is like seeing the patient and, you know, that being the thing you invest your time and energy and focus into. And then for the things that aren't that, either, you know, setting boundaries around what you will or won't do for patients. Let's just be frank about it. That could be part of it. Charging patients for things that are not covered by the government. That's another, like the third party thing that often we can have a lot of hangups about, but something to consider, you know, in a way that feels good to you and your values, but there's absolutely a way to consider it. And everything else doing as quickly and efficiently as possible. Like get that AI scribe or have the shortest notes ever, because you know that amount of it, unless you love charting, so you want to protect it because it brings you joy, which most of the time it isn't. It's not earning you income. It's not a fulfilling, satisfying task. Let's do it as mediocrely as possible. I still don't know what the adverb version of that is, and I've said it so many times on this podcast. It's fine. As mediocre as possible. And then get on with it. And same with the inbox. Like, what do we want to do about that? Like, and there isn't one way. There's multiple ways, but can we be creative about saying inbox time, important part of our work that is less or uncompensated. So what can we do about that? If we are really thinking, which is hard to do when you're just on the hustle hamster wheel, but have you created space for yourself? Probably prioritizing creating space by either delegating from the inbox or finding ways to get really efficient and mediocre with your inbox. That would be a way to go, to create space and then create more of your energy and time, maybe to see more patients or find other avenues to earn income if seeing more patients feels like it's beyond your capacity, right? Even looking at which kinds of care, you know, I don't know, bill the highest. Do you also enjoy some of those kinds of care? Do you want to prioritize those in your week, in your calendar? And the way you would consider to do that, like doing that kind of high level, like being the air traffic controller of your life and of your schedule of your week, you need time in your week to do that. You need a space to look over your week, look over your schedule, and make those sort of like CEO level decisions, strategizing about your life to say, how can I, you know, offer myself a stable and sufficient resource of income, as well as not burn myself out. These things do not, like, how do we solve for that math? We can do it, right? And we can do that if we have space to think about it. The other ways that there's diminishing returns on your hustle that aren't like directly related to money stuff is like performance impact. And this is where I think it would apply to those that are working on a salary model. Like most people who work on a salary have a direct employer that pays them that salary. And there likely are certain KPIs or like certain things that your employer at least wants you to prioritize about your job. There's also what you want to prioritize about your job. Hopefully those things are not in too much direct conflict, right? But there's the things that are most valued that you're doing. And then there's a bunch of other crap that someone maybe asked you to do once, or you think is nice to do. Or, maybe you do have an employer who's asking you to do a bunch of little silly things, but that really actually is getting in the way of you doing the thing that's of highest value. And so that's the thing, that if we don't check that, at some point, our job performance is going to suffer. Like if you are trying to do 80 hours worth of work in a 40-hour work week, when honestly, probably most of us, our mental and physical capacity to work a 40-hour work week is questionable, especially when you're doing high brain function intensity tasks. It is questionable whether our brains are all really optimized to run at high performance quality for 40 hours a week. If your job performance suffers, right? I mean, then you might be at risk of, I don't know, it depends on your job. Like you don't get your bonus, or I'm sorry, I don't know if that happens so much in healthcare. I know it happens, like my husband worries about that kind of stuff, for example. But like, even beyond that, I mean, at certain points, you can be like, I'm working so hard to make this money, and you work so hard that you end up not doing as quality of a job about the parts of your job that your organization values most, that you value most, and like maybe your job is at risk, right? Risk of being fired, that sort of thing. Another way is like, so if we work beyond our capacity all the time, definitely. So like I said, then our cognition suffers, our energy levels suffer. We are way more likely to make distracted and like burnt out mistakes. I'm trying not to say like silly or careless, because those feel so self-blamey. And the point is like, you're like brain fog because you're working over capacity, and through the fog, more likely to make errors that you otherwise wouldn't have made, right? So there's a cost to that. First of all, there's a cost to like duplicating and triplicating your work. So, I remember times when I was working and burnt out and beyond my capacity, and I would send in a prescription and not realize that I had messed up the dose, and that could have been a med error, first of all. But even if the pharmacy was great and caught it for me, now I'm getting it faxed back. I have to do it again. I've duplicated my work, right? I forget to do the right referral right after, and then it comes back to me and the patient's upset, and I have to like deal with it for much longer. I've made an error. The patient's upset with me. That could has its own possible, fallout later on down the line of like, if you make more errors are a time that potentially someone could decide to lodge a complaint, could decide to have a lawsuit. I'm not saying any of this to freak you out, but I am saying this to know there is a cost to working too much. I'm not saying this to like threaten anyone, but I just want to name, we think like, but I gotta keep working. Otherwise my patients will be mad and they will sue me. And I'm like, hold on. When we really think about what are the odds of lawsuits and college complaints, which though we can absolutely survive and we don't have to be terrified of them, they would absolutely add to our workload to like talk to lawyers and do the paperwork. So if we'd rather avoid having that on our schedule, ironically, having less on our schedule overall will help that, because we'll be resourced, we'll be rested, we will have our empathy. Because when we lose our empathy, it's not because we become a terrible demon person, it's usually because we are so overworked that it is fatigued, right? So if we have that back, then we have those connections with patients, and all of that absolutely lowers our risk of things like complaints and lawsuits coming our way. It just does, right? Also, some of those can be costly, right? If you have to pay a lawyer or settle, so the notion that more work equals more money, I'm just trying to poke holes in that argument in every way I can think of. That's what I'm doing here. Not to freak people out, but to really help dismantle the notion of like, yeah, but if I saw 5 more patients, I'd make more money, and I should always do that. Knowing that there's a point at which that is absolutely diminishing returns, and it could absolutely end up costing you more than it makes you, is worth considering, right? Unknown losses. Oh yeah, this is one, and I haven't personally experienced it, thankfully, but I've heard about it enough that I think it's worth bringing up. The part of it I have personally experienced is when I was seeing patients more frequently, to the point where I then did not have mental capacity and also like calendar time capacity to really understand my finances. I also had the socialization of never wanting to look at my finances, and that was a piece of it. But now that I have time, energy, and have unshamed money, every week I do a money date. That's what I did, before this, where I was like, oh, I guess I have made more income, right? So I have actually had the time, space, and emotional resourcing to look at my money and understand it. That is just great because then I can make strategic decisions about money and recognize when, oh, that cost is actually higher than I expected. And what do I want to do about that? And like balance my budget and make strategic financial decisions. I can only do that if I have time and space to do that. Also, for me as like an employer, the thing that I was going to say that I've heard happens often enough is that, sometimes, unfortunately, staff members or whoever you have helping you with finances either makes mistakes, and I don't want to get into, honestly, I personally don't want to be like combing through and like micromanaging and checking over someone's like shoulder for mistakes, but it's useful to have enough of a space and time and brain to observe the flow of income to understand if some grave large error has happened. Also, sometimes people steal from you. And, that, again, I haven't experienced that personally, thankfully, but I have heard about it often enough. And the story will be like it was happening for years, but the busy physicians didn't notice, right? And there's multiple reasons for that, especially that socialization piece, but absolutely that hustling so hard, they never noticed that the checks didn't make sense, right? So another reason to consider having space in your life to do your own version of a money date, to actually get to know your finances, like, and build a relationship with the money that you're bringing in and spending out. And that would come by working less and spending some of your time that you're not working doing that instead, which actually I would still count as working. But often when we're saying working less, we mean like seeing less patients, just to name. The last way that working beyond your capacity might mean that, well, this category is less about like earning less income, but like thinking when we talk about wanting to make more money, we usually don't want it just to be like, yay, more money came through my bank account. Like we would like to have space of the money that we make in order to do things that we enjoy. And so it's less about like earning money than like having money to spend on things we like, right? And something that absolutely I've seen happen and can relate to is when you are working way harder than your capacity allows, one of the ways, and so therefore maybe you see like, look at all these dollars I'm bringing in. I hate my life, but at least I've got money. One of the things that many people do and that the economy loves when you do and markets to you in particular is like offers you ways to spend that money. And the examples I'm about to list, I want to say in a completely descriptive and unshaming way. So if something I'm about to list, you absolutely love spending your money on and it fills your cup and you really enjoy it and it's like a source of joy and pleasure and satisfaction in your life, I'm not talking to you. Okay? Ignore this part. But something that happens is what I'm calling expensive buffers. There's this idea of buffering that I got from one of my coaching trainings, which is like activities that you do in order to avoid feeling your feelings. And so one thing that we do when we're super burnt out and we just are desperate to feel happy in any kind of way is that we spend money on things that we actually don't value or care about. They may give us a dopamine hit. And so I know folks who overspend versus what they actually value on clothes or shoes or diets or expensive vacations or cars or technology. And it's sort of for the hit, like the hit of the buying and the having. But then when you have it, like you're not even that excited about it, right? I think many of us can identify either personally or know someone where the amount that they're buying doesn't seem to match the amount that is giving them enjoyment. And so an interesting thing happened to me, certainly, as I created space and enjoyed more of my life, including enjoyed my work because it was the amount of work that was enjoyable for me. And then also had time to do other things that I enjoyed, including other things that made money, like the coaching work that I've received through doing this podcast and the speaking work and that sort of thing. That's some of the ways that I've earned money outside of my clinical work, right? But also the things I do that absolutely earn me no income, where I'm just resting and relaxing and singing Taylor Swift or whatever, right? all of that I've noticed has made my craving for vacations in particular way less. Like, 3 years ago, I took 4 weeks off in the summer, and that was so delicious and so fabulous, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought at the time, like, yeah, I'm definitely going to do that every single summer. But I found that I actually don't have as much of an urge to spend that much time away. I usually do 3 weeks, and that's still really nice. But the notion of spending even more time away from work, at least this year, one of my drivers to do it in the past was to kind of like get away from it all and to prove to my brain that I would survive even if I was only a human being, not a human doing. So that was useful. But I know in the past, like sometimes I'd be like, I need a vacation because this job is so terrible and I hate it so much. And it's like a refuge in the storm. Now that it feels like my life, my regular working life is way less of a storm and more of a vacation. And I like do the things that I love anyway. It means that when I do go on vacation, I can enjoy them more because I'm not like, excuse me, like detoxing and recovering from a terrible working life. But also I feel less desperate for them. And so I have found less desire to go on a bunch of them. And again, if you love traveling and you love being away from work and vacations and that's like fills your cup, that's also fine. Keep that. It's all good. That's like a way to create space, really. I'm just naming for myself. Yes, one thing I used to do is buy more clothes than I really needed. And even beyond what I really needed, like I would buy clothes and I'd buy them because there was a sale and then they wouldn't fit. And I was just going for the high. Like I wasn't really fully thinking through my like clothing decisions. And I just don't feel the need to do that anymore. And overall, that's been a net benefit for my life. Just as an example. And that's because I'm like enjoying my life and not just like scrolling on Instagram while they target clothing ads at me in the middle of a chaotic life, you know? So those are all the ways that working beyond your capacity can cost you money. It can actually mean you're earning less than you could, or you're spending more than you otherwise would, right? So what if it's possible for you to work less, work under your capacity, and still make the same amount of money, maybe make more money, or even if you end up making same or less money, having more money because you're spending less on things you don't care. Like what if, and that's the thing that typically people actually care about is like, what if you end up with more money to do what you want with and actually enjoy what you're doing with? And that is by creating space and working under capacity, that's the journey that gets you there. Working smarter, not harder is like, that's an expression. People know that. What if doing that kind of approach actually gets you more of the money that is actually important to you to get, right? So how does that work? So if you create space for your brain to be rested, for your body to be fulfilled and resourced, then you get to create high quality work. So less of those errors and less risk of that unnecessary work and duplication of work from the errors, as well as the financial impact and consequences of those errors. And then, like I was saying before, prioritizing the work that actually pays you best in either money or other things you genuinely value. So, sometimes I witness physicians and they are so hyper-focused on money that they're doing a bunch of work and like, I hate this work, but it pays me the best. And so everyone gets to live their life, but I get curious about that. But what amount of the work you're like, okay, these kinds of visits or this kind of work definitely pays me the best sort of per hour or something. And I know that I have capacity for this much of it. And then I can fill in some of my other time with something I really enjoy. It's maybe lower paying, but it pays me in other ways, right? Like what can you find a flow and a balance that actually feels good for you, right? Having the space to bill effectively, or, I guess if your salary, like ensure your boss is paying you correctly, right? Oversee your finances, like my money date, like I said. Time to address your business issues as they arise. So time to coach your employees, train them up to be the delegate that you want them to be, to take on some of the tasks that will allow everyone to work not only more efficiently, but more spaciously in connection with them. Project managing. So like one of our expenses over a year now was moving to a new clinic space. And so having space to deciding how much of that to take on for myself personally was a piece of it. And then doing that part well because I had time to do it that was important. Time to put out fires, but from a rested and resource state, instead of feeling like you're so overstretched already that now you're not able to give your best self to the fire that arises, and not just assuming that the fire will never arise, because fires happen all the time, certainly in healthcare, but I think in many professions, right? It's like that surge capacity thing, like saving for emergencies. You save money for an emergency and you save time for an emergency. You have space in your calendar for when those things come up. Another major way that has been important for me is creating other avenues to earn income. So I like to give the details, not because I think this is the one roadmap to do it, and not just to like spill my dirty laundry, but like, I think it helps when people say concretely how they do it, because a lot of times it sort of seems abstract and mysterious. So like, as I have cut back a bit of my clinical work, and including delegating some of it to Amy, who you've heard on the podcast, the nurse practitioner who helps me oversee my practice, some of the ways that I fund that and earn the additional income I was talking about at the top is through teaching. So like through the university that I'm a faculty at, teaching, as well as like private teaching, speaking, workshop style teaching, doing that for a number of different groups. And I love that so much. And I'm always so excited when I get another invitation to go to a conference and teach, or like a private group wants to pay me to talk to them. That's like some of my favorite work. Some consulting type work that I've done in the past, and that could be an option for you. It's something I think always, so I'm not talking just about myself, but for you, like what teaching opportunities are there and what's the variety of incomes those can bring in. Useful to kind of do your research on that. Consulting, healthcare professionals. Definitely, there are lots of companies that would love like someone who's a healthcare professional to help with consulting on like a health related part of their business. So like I don't personally do that kind of income generation currently, but I see it all the time. Like maybe because I live close to like a tech hub, and there's always like a new startup that they're saying, does anyone want to consult about this? And so looking into that, if that's something that's interesting to you. Different like creative side projects, like this podcast, this whole podcast is my creative side project, and I earn income from it through the times that people like buy my courses or hire me for speaking or join my programs. That is like what funds this podcast, and therefore is another avenue of income that I get. Speaking, so for myself, like I just said, but also for you, or have you ever considered whether you'd want to be a speaker? And people in healthcare, there's a certain draw for folks in healthcare to be giving talks, whether they're health related, or they're actually just about the world and how you see it, because we have a unique perspective because of the work we do, right? And so not only is that a source of income, but also it amplifies my impact. It energizes me. I had that whole episode about being a multi-potentialite. So for me, having these different streams of creativity, meaning, impact, it is work. There's different, tasks involved in it. And for a lot of them, I also earn income that way. It works really well for me and I really love it. And so what if that was possible for you? I know we go through all this training and we think, well, I've got to just be this one thing. And if you're happy to be the one thing, that's great. But a lot of us actually work a bit better if there's a balance and variety to what we're doing day to day, week to week, right? Finally, if you have space for you and you've done the work to create the space so that you are under your capacity, part of that process is getting to know yourself better and changing your relationship to yourself so you're not like overworking and sort of self-harming in that way, right? And as you get to know yourself better, you'll know yourself well enough to know what is worth spending your money on. Like I sort of said about the like slightly overspending on clothes and like other things that were like, sometimes I do still get into a little pattern of like over buying books that I end up not reading. So I'm still looking at that one and it's okay, but like that's just as another example. And so then you're choosing to spend your money on what matters, right? And less of that kind of buffering thing, because my life, like I was saying, my life feels more like a vacation. And so that means I'm less inclined to take or spend money on vacations. And that's just a me thing. So those are some ways in which working less could equal more money for you, what actually matters to you, right? Now, living spaciously, it does come with like a cost. So I don't want to say like it's all roses. The process of creating space and working less. The thing that has been the sort of most common and prevalent, though it's definitely better than it was at the beginning, but the main side effect that has been difficult for me as I worked less is the part of my brain that screams at me that I should be working more. I could be working more is factual. Should I be working more? That's the shame coming in, right? And this notion of like, times where people will approach me and ask me to be on this committee or on this project, and maybe it has income or not. So sometimes it's like leaving money on the table if it's not for you, if it would stretch and blast through your capacity. There's parts of my brain that really can feel freaked out by that and be like, oh my gosh, that's not good. If I have an opportunity, I should take it. And I could see someone, especially if you've been very financially motivated towards your work, where that's one of your primary motivations. There'll be a part of your brain that like sees the dollars you could have made if you crammed in 10 more patients in a day, and really have to work through the process of why that might still be worth it for you. Why you might, in the end, still have financial benefit. But in the short term, if your brain is very primed to think like, see more people, make more money, you might have to do a real detox, and it might feel really uncomfortable. So know that that may happen. In my opinion, it is very worth it in the end. Do you want the discomfort of detoxing a pattern of behavior that ultimately is probably going to hurt you in the end, and maybe even patients, etc.? Or do you want to feel the discomfort of the consequences of overworking, right? Like if you're going to feel pain and discomfort either way, I'm always a fan of choosing the kind of discomfort that leads me back to myself. And in this case, does not necessarily mean you make less money, like I said, right? You might, though, as a part of like, as the process of living spaciously goes on, there may be periods of time, say you go from full-time to part-time, and then you're still exploring other avenues to make different kinds of income. Like say you kind of are doing a strategy like I did. There might be a period of time where you make less money. Like I said, I thought that happened and it actually didn't. I had a note in here like, that's happened to me. And then I look back and it did not. So, don't assume that's what's going to happen, but I think it's wise to be prepared for it possibly happening, and knowing your money well enough to know, if there's certain expenses that can be paused as well, to make sure that the amount of money you have is what you need to resource your life, right? So that could happen. Some of these pursuits that you're deciding to do instead of the job you have now could have startup money associated with it. So some of them could have higher costs. Not all of them do, for sure. Like, I don't know, just getting a different kind of job. So you're working in two places instead of one. For me, when I was doing teaching at the university, as well as in like practicing medicine in my clinic, both of those did not have startup costs. I just was hired and then earned an income from it. For me, so some of that is still true. And ones like, for example, the production of this podcast and everything that's gone into like doing my coaching training, some ongoing expenses around people I pay to help support my business, my costs have gone up for that reason. And so some years, when I looked back, some years the profit margin, if you will, is slimmer because my expenses were higher. Even though my revenue was higher, my expenses were also higher. So that could happen. So being aware of that, right? I'm not trying to pretend that there might not be pinchy points, because there could be. The question is, why would that possibly still be worth it? Like for me, it still is worth it, even to go through times where I'm having to balance my budget in different ways. But overall, my life feels amazing. It has been very much worth it. And then as you figure out ways to balance your budget, the money comes back to you anyway. That's been very fun to experience. And just really thinking about this as the long game, long term. A lot of the thinking is like, but I can't until my debt's paid down, but I can't until I've invested this much for retirement. And like, what if you can, first of all, do a little bit of all of those things anyway, still pay some towards debt, pay some towards long-term investment? For sure, you could do that. And that could be some of what you put in your budget. And if the total math means that the amount you bring in, however you get there, you're able to do it while not working beyond your capacity, I promise it is worth it, because that means you will work more years of your life. So even if there's one year where it's like financially, you have to work, you don't buy all the expensive things. You wait and you live more frugally or whatever. You pace out your expenses, whatever that might be. And that means that long term, you actually have a sustainable way of working. You're just going to work more years. You're going to retire on your own terms. What if that's still a worthwhile cost short term, right? A lot of this in some ways, when you think about it, is like people thinking only about short term gain without thinking of long term cost. And this way of thinking of, working more spaciously, working under your capacity is more about like possible short-term costs, whether it's money or focus or energy, or, the main cost is honestly like deconditioning socialization and the discomfort and emotional discomfort of that. That's like the main discomfort, honestly, and the main cost. But that short-term cost being worth it for long-term gain, right? Let's flip our mentality and notice that overall it could be beneficial for us. So if you're now like, okay, but how do I do this? I think the actual roadmap will look different for everyone depending on what matters to you, how you do make your money now, what you want to do if you're interested in making money in different ways. Like it'll look so different for different people. But I do think the way to start is like the same creating space decision matrix that I talk about in my like creating space webinar workshop. So if you want me to come give that workshop to your organization, let me know. But also I actually have it for free on my website. So joanchanmd.com/space, it's the video and it's got the decision matrix right in there. And if you want me to help you and support you directly with creating space in this way, I would love to have you in the 2025 class of my Creating Space coaching course. It doesn't start until October of 2025 of this year, but I am decided to open early bird registration in March. You're hearing this at the end of February. So all through the month of March, if you've been watching me, you've heard me talk about creating space and you know this is something that you want for your life and you're ready to jump in now and start doing the work and create space for yourself, you can register in the month of March and you will be eligible for the early bird payment plan. So it's the same cost. Actually, no, it's technically $100 off, but what you'll get access to is a 12-month payment plan. So instead of paying a larger amount monthly or all at once, you can spread out the payments. I'm offering this because I really appreciate it myself, because I like having a smaller, predictable amount of expense versus one big expense. I find my brain does better, my understanding of math does better. So I wanted to offer it to those that would be interested in that as well. The offer expires March 31st. So if you're hearing this and you're interested, go to joanchanmd.com/space. Like I said, you can watch the webinar, make sure you're on board for it. All the details are still the same as it's been running this year. And then you can book a call with me and we can chat about you joining the program. And I would love to have you. I'm still currently in the middle of the Creating Space 2024 edition with the amazing group of healthcare humans that are in there with me. And it's my favorite thing that I'm doing now, honestly. I love it so much. I love them so much. I love seeing them support each other. I love the spaces that have already been created in each of their lives. And I'm so excited for the retreat that has not yet happened. That's going to be happening in April. And I would just love to have you for next year's edition. If you already know that you are in, you can benefit from the payment plan by registering in March. So with that, the question is, how could it be true that working less does not make me less money? Really force yourself to answer that question. How could it be true? If you worked less, how could you not make and have less money? Is that you could see yourself having space to actually prioritize the higher value work or doing different kinds of work that you've been yearning to do that you know could bring in you different income or something else completely. I would love to hear. If you've already gone through this process in some way and want to share your stories, I'd love to hear them as well. And no matter what, thank you for listening as always, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye. I would love to take this work deeper with you. Visit joanchanmd.com today and discover my growing menu of options for restorative medical education to suit your learning needs. I offer one-on-one coaching, customized workshops, and self-study courses that allow you to connect not only with my work on a deeper level, but also with other healthcare humans just like you. So if you want to start humanizing your work in healthcare to a deeper level and do it in community with others, please visit joanchanmd.com and find those options and what fits you and your life today.